This is Michael Strong with When School's Not Working, our weekly show where we have these amazing people who have lived amazing lives, either outside or alongside or without the standard education system, which we tend to be a little bit or incredibly critical of. I'm also the founder of expanseonline.co, a school for kids who hate school, because I hate school and love learning, and where we help develop your child's genius. Without further ado, I'll let Matt introduce himself, and then
Hey guys, thanks, Michael. Matt Barnes, co-founder of The Education Game. We work with parents to help them learn how to change the way their children are educated, ideally to prepare them for a life of creativity and agency and self-leadership. And so I'm so glad to have you on the call today because I'm eager to hear more about the conversation and the experience you have with your son. So I'm Matt Barnes. Thanks for having me here today. Kath, you're next.
Yes. Hi, I'm Catherine Fraze. I'm founder of 100 Rows, which is a research and development company for education. And right now we are creating an online virtual campus for learning for teens 13 to 18. And we talk to parents all the time whose children have not thrived in the traditional education system, and I enjoy talking to parents, and especially this one. Jennifer has got a great story, and I'm really excited to hear more about her journey with her son Caleb.
Well, and since I knew you first, Jennifer, I'm going to take the pleasure of both introducing you in a minor way as well as putting you on the spot in as embarrassing a way as I possibly can. So no, Jennifer is figure in Austin homeschooling and Austin community. She and her son visited my school here in Austin, and he spoke several years ago. It was so memorable. He's a professional actor, but also just a great kid in many ways. I guess a great young man. I can't call him a kid anymore. At some point, you have to keep doing that. Maybe you can. But we had Caleb on the show, I don't know, several weeks ago, one of the most amazing shows. He's very articulate, talked about his experience, both as an actor and alternative schooler and ultimately a Harvard admittee. And I see Jennifer regularly on Facebook, and she likes all the good stuff. So I like her because she likes good stuff. And my question for you, Jennifer, is why weren't you a normal parent who sent your kid to normal school? What was wrong with you that you took poor Caleb out of the system?
Well, I tried being a good parent or a normal parent that sent him to regular school. We started out that way. It just didn't continue that way. What happened was we were living up in Seattle. They had a form of school choice there. We had started him in a program called the APP. It was the Accelerated Progress program. And school started at 9 in the morning. It went till 2:30. He had 2 recesses. He had no homework. And the kids were working way above grade level, like 2 years ahead of grade level. And they're able to do that even without homework. So then we decide to move to Austin, Texas in the middle of the year. We come down here, we enroll him in the local public school. It's supposedly an exemplary program. And all exemplary means is that all the kids at the school pass the tax test, which I think is the name of the high stakes standardized test. And that's simply because of socioeconomic level. We live in a middle class to upper middle class neighborhood, and there's no multifamily housing zone that goes to that school. So of course all the kids are going to pass. It's very stable, kids not moving around, parents that are involved. But the school day started at 7:45 in the morning. It went until almost 3 o'clock, 1 recess, very regimented. And suddenly he started to have mood swings and severe anxiety. And at first I thought it was just a difficulty with moving and him adjusting to the new state. And he seemed to get better when summer came around. You know, he was allowed to sleep in, he was allowed to do his own thing. He kind of became the kid that we had up there. But then the first week of second grade, he came home and he declared he hated reading, which was heartbreaking because all summer long he was reading, you know, and he was reading books that he really enjoyed, chapter books, as he called them, like Because of Winn-Dixie, and he read all the Roald Dahl books, and he read, you know, he's reading the Goosebumps series. And, you know, part of it, we didn't really know anyone here in the neighborhood yet, and it's 100 degrees in Texas over the summer. So he spent all summer reading. So for him to come home and declare that he hates reading, you know, I was like, ah! You know, I was very, very concerned about this. And I asked him why, and the reason was he had started reading the Seekers series. You know, he'd gotten a book from the library, and he went to go check out the next one in the series, and the school librarian would not let him because she said it was above his grade level. And so so I should go back to the first grade. Well, first, I decided that this hour of homework they were giving him every night was too much. So it was cutting into our family time. His school day was already longer. He was stressed out. We didn't have time to do anything fun as a family. We didn't have time to play games. It was just school, 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 school all the time. And I knew that that wasn't right because as far as the homework went, I knew it wasn't good because in the AAP program or APP program, they specifically said, we don't give homework because young children don't benefit from it. So I end up pulling up this study, I think using Google Scholar, and I find the Duke University study from 2006 that says homework is beneficial in high school, and some can be beneficial in middle school, but it's not terribly beneficial in elementary school. In fact, too much homework can be counterproductive. So I, print that out, and I also find a, popular press, just in case I don't want to read the actual study, popular press story about it that I found. And I take it to the school administration and I say, look, my son is coming home. He's got this hour of homework every night. I mean, it's just too much. This isn't good for him. Look, I mean, here's this meta-analysis of all these homework studies, and it shows that this hurts kids his age. And, he's kind of having a rough time. And they said, well, if we don't give homework, parents aren't happy with us. Mm. And I'm like, well, somehow parents believe that the kids aren't learning without homework. And I'm like, well, but look, the evidence here says that it's actually counterproductive. And I finally got them to agree to let me have my son just do 10 minutes of homework a night and call it a day. And if he didn't finish it, it didn't matter. So I was like, okay, that works for me, Well, then he starts getting check minuses on his assignments because they're not complete. So then I have to go talk to the teacher. So I already started to feel like I was becoming that parent, the one I'm talking about, the one that's like showing up and driving people crazy because of, well, the rest of the kids manage. What's the matter with your kid?
I love those parents. I love those parents, by the way. I teach them how to be that parent. Go on, sorry.
Well, okay, so anyway, so now we go to second grade. And then I find myself in the library talking to the librarian. Why won't you let him check out the Seekers book? She said, well, because it's above his grade level. And I said, but he took the DLRA, and I think that's what the test was called, and it's the developmental reading assessment or whatever. And he scored, high enough, actually higher than checking out this third grade book. And she said, well, we just don't want the kids to feel like they're above their head, so they give up. And I'm like, but he read the first book. I mean, instead he's coming home saying he doesn't like reading anymore. So, and they weren't going to budge, so I went and bought him the second book in the Seekers series. Wow. And then finally, he I mean, I don't want to be like TMI here, but his moods were so up and down, that I I was really concerned. And, you know, I called some child psychotherapists here to see about getting him into counseling, because, you know, at this point it'd been about a year since we moved, and or not quite a year, but he just didn't seem to be adjusting. And he was, you know, a sweet little boy when we lived in Seattle, and suddenly he's like mouthy to people, he's breaking down in tears, he's having anxiety attacks. And the one thing I said is, I don't want him put on medication. And, you know, the people that I talked to on the phone that I was interviewing, well, we can't guarantee that we are not going to recommend that. And I'm like, well, then he's not going to see you. So I just started reading, and I'm already a pretty big nonfiction reader. And so, you know, I had read a couple of books when he was a baby. One of them was Einstein Never Used Flashcards, and, you know, that discussed how important play was for mental development for children. Another one was Mel Levine's A Mind at a Time, talking about how, you know, people learn differently. And that was one of the good things about the Seattle School District, is they did have a kind of school choice. I don't know if they still do, but they had, you know, there was a Montessori school you could send your kids to. There was an alternative school. There were foreign language immersion programs. There was this accelerated program my son went to. And so, you know, it was frustrating to suddenly be in a school district where kids are, you know, fungible. I guess that's the word. Like, they think that they're all alike. And so I had started reading the book, Nurture Shock. And I don't know if any of you have ever read it.
Yep.
But there was a chapter that jumped out at me, or a section, and it was called The Lost Hour. And it was about how sleep, when children are sleep deprived, you know, adolescents, young children, tweens, it affects their ability to learn. But more importantly, it affects their moods and their mental health. And it hit me. We had taken my son from a school that started at 9 a.m. Pacific time and moved him to the central time zone into a school that started at 7:45. And we were having to drag him out of a deep sleep every morning, you know, and he'd go to bed by 9 o'clock. So it wasn't like he was staying up late. There were no television or computers in the room. He was going to bed, but he probably had a sleep cycle in the morning still, either REM or deep sleep, that he was being pulled out of, and it was affecting his moods.
Sure.
And honestly, his behavior was indicative of a kid that's bipolar. I mean, it was so all over the place. It was frightening. So then I go to the school, I Xerox the section in the book, and I say, I'm really concerned that this, you know, I explained what was going on with my son, and I'm thinking that me having to get him at school at 7:45 in the morning is the cause of, you know, these mental health issues. And, you know, they seemed like they understood. And I asked if we could get him a later starting time, because I'm that parent, right? You know, I'm the one who's like, well, I'm going to make this work for him. And so they initially were okay with that. So I just let him sleep in. Well, the problem was, by the time he got up naturally on his own and we got him dressed and fed and to school, it was after 9 a.m. So they did that for a couple of weeks. And then they said, listen, we can't let you do this anymore, because at a certain point, he's got to be here for him to be marked present. And we don't get paid if he's not here at that time.
Bingo.
So you're going to have to bring him in earlier. And that, and an instance where he had to do this take-home project that was ridiculous, where he really wanted to go deep in and ask some questions on the scientific revolution. And I said to him, you don't have time, you have to move on, you have to draw a map, that's not part of the grading rubric. And I just thought, this is ridiculous. Here a kid is intellectually curious about something, he wants to explore it, and I'm telling him, no, 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 you can't learn any more about Galileo and the scientific revolution because it's not part of a grading rubric. I mean, the incentives were all wrong. And so at that point, I had been talking to my husband since the beginning of the year about pulling him out of school because I didn't feel good about it. And while he was very against it in the beginning, and while it's not like he's the head of the household, it is a partnership. And so I had to have buy-in from him on it. And I think being able to show him that, wow, see, we let him sleep in and the mental health difficulties went away. And look how intellectually curious he is. And look at, the perverse incentives that the school is enforcing or that they have. I finally got him to agree. And so we pulled him out over spring break. And we told him a week in advance we were going to do that. And so that is how we ended up being not good parents. And he became a second grade dropout.
Oh, I love it. So Jennifer, so many wonderful things about that. First, I'm so glad we had you on the show. Caleb's, obviously his memory of second grade is not
right.
Right. So we got maybe a 20-second version from him. And the drama, no such thing as too much information.
Okay.
The drama. Well, part of what we want to do is we want to help other parents. I mean, for me, so Alex, you're listening, we need to have a series of heroic moms and dads and this clip of parents who make this decision. Because for me, if your child is not flourishing, Matt has this wonderful thing. It should be like the emergency room in a hospital. It's all hands on deck. Let's rush to stop the bleeding now. And you're one of those parents, and it took you a while, even though then. So that's part of what we want to do. And I think hearing parents tell these stories of how they got there is absolutely essential. So yeah, thank you on that.
Sure.
I had a quick question for you, Jennifer. First off, thank you for that backstory. I mean, we know a little bit about where this is going, and it's pretty amazing. And so looking forward to getting into that. But you've mentioned that the school, gosh, there's so many things here you mentioned, but one of the points that I picked up on was how parents are actually upset if their children don't get homework, right? And that's something that I see. I actually talked to a parent yesterday about this very issue. Can you explain to that parent that I talked to yesterday why, you've done some research on this, why homework and why having free time makes sense for a child, and why it makes sense that in 8 and 7.5 hours of school, that should be plenty of time to learn what they need to learn on a daily basis?
Well, I would even say 7.5 hours of school is too long, because when I did homeschool him for that first year and a half, I was lucky to get 3 hours, 4 days a week.
Right.
That was it. And I felt very neurotic about that. He fought me on things. I abandoned the writing curriculum I initially had for him because it just hit me. And again, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, but if there were one thing I could do differently, it would be to have let go of all the neuroses I felt when I first pulled him out, because that made it harder on me. It made it harder on him. I had heard from other homeschooling parents that you don't need that much time. I wanted to believe that, but sort of, we're kind of indoctrinated, right? Most of society tells you that, oh, you need to have this many hours. And so I just felt very nervous about it. But at one point, and I read this book, like I said, when he was an infant, called Einstein Never Used Flashcards. And it talked about, I wish I still had the book. I lent it to somebody. I've stopped lending books to people because I never get them back. And the things I remember from it were that, there's this huge baby money complex. Like, he never did baby Einstein videos. We didn't pay for Gymboree. We didn't do any of those things. I just stuck him on a blanket and he played with toys. And sometimes I try to join him and play with him, but he was not interested. The only time he wanted my attention was the minute I opened the computer or I got on the phone. Then it's like, ah. But otherwise, he was so content to sit and just play with, the stuffed animals and the blocks and whatever else.
Yeah.
And, he started talking early, and, we read to him too. Like, there's a lot of story time, but we never did any of those things
Right.
that a lot of parents do. Like, we weren't trying to teach him math when he was 2, and we weren't trying to teach him to read. We just let him be a kid.
So in some ways, you knew that the 7 hours plus an hour more of homework at night, that was wildly more than what was actually needed. And so it made it easier for you to actually push back on that. I think a lot of parents, they assume that more is always better. You learned that less can be better. And so that maybe gave you a little freedom.
Well, right. And I think it's because of what I read in that book, which I no longer have. I wish I could like pull it out and cite what I read, but I don't even remember the specifics of it. Just that kids learn through play.
Sure.
They don't. And I'd read some articles about, at-risk kids who had been put in these studies where some of them had after-school tutoring, and other of those at-risk kids played board games. And the kids who got to do the afternoon program where they played board games actually did better in school than the kids who got the additional tutoring outside of school.
Yeah.
And so, I remember those things, and just watching his development without forcing early academics on him. Sure. And I think too, we had the good fortune of him starting out in first grade at the Accelerated Progress Program, and having the principal come out and say, well, research shows that, homework is counterproductive. And so I did actually have an authority explaining to me. And so they were just, they were a little bit different. They were ahead on that, they were ahead of the curve there.
Kath wanted a question. Go. Are you muted, Kath?
Yeah, she's muted. I can't hear her.
I am sorry.
Okay.
You took him out around spring break time. So many homeschoolers, when they make that decision, feel like they have to go out and buy all this curriculum and be ready to get going on day one. But it seems like the conventional wisdom for people who've been homeschooling a while think that maybe a period of deschooling, or just sort of relaxing for a little bit and sort of reworking out how you want to move forward might be, a good idea. So tell me about your experience. Day one, you've made the decision, you're at home. How did you approach starting your homeschooling journey?
Well, again, it wasn't terribly organized. He took the spring break, and I think the first day of what would have been homeschool, we drove out to the hill country. We live in Austin, and we drove an hour or so to the Lyndon B. Johnson Ranch. You can do a tour of it, but they also have something called I think it's the Sauer Family Farm, but it's like a living farm, and the people are dressed up, and you walk and see the animals. It's like it's a working farm, and there are all these volunteers. And so we just spent the day doing that, going to the farm and then looking at the bison over, there's like a ranch next door to it, and we had a picnic. And then I think another day I let him build this Connects kit that he hadn't done yet. But I guess I'm not as relaxed as a lot of these people who go through the deschooling, because I'm like, okay, you've had a week of fun. Let's, get down to business. So I ordered some Singapore math books. I ordered a writing curriculum. I ordered a history curriculum. And, for reading, I just let him pick the books that he wanted to read. And I figured that was enough. And I was investigating science curriculums, right? Well, what I found out pretty early on, the writing curriculum, it was a battle back and forth. The math worked well, and I could get about an hour of math out of him a day. And math was really like, he's gifted in math. So that was a subject that he could rip through. And there was relatively little pushback on that. And then the writing, like I said, it was just a fight back and forth. And then I thought about it, and I remembered reading in a book at some point that different people are ready to learn things at different times.
Right.
And I thought back, I had this roommate after I got out of college, and she was so insightful, really smart, but she grew up feeling stupid. And she told me the reason was that she just could not learn to read until she was 8. And so everybody treated her like she was slow.
Sure.
And then years later, I was working on a project. And so I was reading about how different kids learn. And, this is before I had kids. And I read that there's a natural reading window. Like some kids can learn as early as 4, which I did. And some kids can learn as late as 8. And either way, it doesn't mean one of them is smarter than the other. It doesn't mean that either of them is going to be a better reader when they get to high school. It's just when that switch flips on.
Sure.
And so it occurred to me that perhaps my son's writing switch hadn't flipped on yet. And me trying to force paragraph structures and grammar and was going to give him some anxiety around writing.
Yes.
And so I just let it go. It was hard, but I had to tell myself, I just have to have faith. The switch hasn't flipped. I thought back to when I was trying to learn to write when I was younger, how hard it was for me. And I did develop some anxiety around that. And I wasn't going to do it to him. So he let it go. So at that point, all we had him do was math. He got to read his books. And I had a history curriculum. And what we would do is we would read the stories together, and then we would just discuss them. Yeah. And that was it. That was it for school, for him, for the rest of 2nd grade and for all of 3rd grade. Yeah. And so about 3 hours of academics a day. And then the rest of the time he just played. He built Legos. He, go to park day. There was a homeschool soccer here. We would go twice a week to that. I mean, the great thing about Austin is there's a huge homeschooling community here. Yeah. And that gave us a lot of opportunity for some activities outside of the house.
Very cool.
So that's so great. I'm very curious. You sort of got to this quasi unschooling place. And then did you continue? What's the balance between structure and freedom kind of going forward after that point? Okay,
so I'd like to say that, and then we homeschooled for ever, and everything was wonderful, but that is not how it worked out. It was very challenging to try. He sometimes would get lonely. And because we go to this park day and the kids were nice enough, but he didn't really click with any of them. And as I was explaining to somebody else, at the time, the pulling him out of school, me not working, the relying on one income, we were stressed about money. We weren't poor, but it was like, we have one income. And so I didn't want to spend money on very much, right? And so I was doing a lot of the free homeschooling activities. And the issue with free means that people aren't necessarily that committed to them. Mm-hmm. And so you'd go to homeschooling soccer and he'd meet a great friend. That friend would be there 3 or 4 times, someone he really connected with, and then they'd stop coming and you'd never see him again. And if I had it to do over again, I'd realize I would have invested in some of the pay, I would have sucked it up and paid the money for some of the pay programs, because when people are paying money, they show up. And it would have allowed him a more consistent peer group. Even if it's just once a week, you can still build relationships that way. So what ended up happening was I just decided that we were having trouble with him meeting people. And so I started on this hunt for alternative schools, and we went and explored some. And we got him into one of these micro schools. It was new. It was the second year that they were running. And I had gone to the public presentation, you know, when they're open up saying, oh, we're just finishing up our first year. Maybe it was their second year they were finishing up, and this is our philosophy. And it really spoke to me. And the teacher that I spoke to, I loved her. I felt this real connection to her. And I'm like, this is, we will make it work. We'll get the money, we'll make this work. So we start him at this school in the fall. We got him in. And the teacher that I love so much, she was gone. And it's because the founder of this school had this kind of weird sort of thing he did where whoever had the lowest rankings from parents would lose their job. Oh, wow. Which when you think about it is really strange, but I didn't know that, you know. But for whatever reason, she was no longer there. And the first year of the school, pretty much they stayed true to the philosophy that they told me at this public meeting, or the way they presented the school. And then suddenly the founder of this school decided that the teachers couldn't answer questions anymore. And like they're called guides, but they really weren't guiding. And so he had this shift in his philosophy, and it was no longer my philosophy. So we just kept him there. We finished out the second year, and then we tried to find a different school, and we found one. In fact, Michael, didn't you help start Bronze Doors?
I did. I helped Ariel Miller start that. Yeah.
Right. So he toured at Bronze Doors before they became Skybridge. And we decided to transfer him to Skybridge, but at that point, that tuition was a little steep for us. And luckily they had the option of letting him go part-time. And so he went a couple of days a week. So then he became a homeschooler again. He did 2 days at Skybridge, and then he did the rest of the time at home. So we kept his math at home. We kept some other things at home. And so at least he got to go a couple days a week. He did that for a couple of years. And he continued to do math at his own pace. And at that point, he was actually booking professional jobs acting. So that worked out well, because there's no way the public school would have permitted him to miss school to go and do that. And so finally, in second half of 7th grade, we'd gone out to LA because we would periodically go out for him to audition for things, because at that point he had some pretty high-end talent representation out there, and they just wanted him to be out there to audition in person. And so we went out in January, or actually February 1st, he booked a movie a week later, and a couple weeks after that, we were up in Canada for a month. And he got to work on a set with a bunch of kids, and it was, you know, part of the setting was in a public school. And I think he kind of started romanticizing the idea of public school because of that. He had had like so much fun. And so at the end of that, he said, he told me for 8th grade, he wanted to try public school again. And I didn't want him to, but you know, what do you say, right? I'm a firm believer in, you know, you have standards for your kids, but they do need to be self-directed. And if he wants to try it again, I said, look, you're going to give up your spot at Skybridge. And he said, and they have a wait list. And he said he didn't care. He wanted to try it. So he started public school again in 8th grade.
So I think there's a drama here. Let's let Matt ask his question before we go into the next one.
Well, yeah, I mean, so Jennifer, you skipped some of this issue about his interest in acting, right? And so again, of course, we interviewed him a couple weeks ago, but between elementary school and middle school, he started to show a real desire for acting. Yes.
Well, what happened was after we started homeschooling, you know, and he had time on his hands, right? He took it was over the summer after he dropped out of 2nd grade. He took a theater camp, and we had tried him in all sorts of activities, and just nothing stuck. And he was kind of cranky and you know, we had him do robotics camp the year before because he was really mathematically inclined, and we thought he would like that. And he did not. And so he complained because he had done an after-school drama program at the school before he left. And his big complaint was, you know, this was supposed to be drama club and we didn't even get to put on a play. That was his thing. We didn't even get to put on a play. They just made puppets. And and so I said, well, let's think about doing, you know, there's summer camp for theater. Do you want to try that? And he said that he did. And so I signed him up. And I remember the first day driving to pick him up, because he'd always start these programs and he'd be super enthusiastic. And then you show up at the end of the first day and he'd hate it for whatever reason, because it did not live up to his expectations, maybe. I don't know, because he's a little socially nervous and I have no idea. But I remember driving to pick him up with my hands on the steering wheel thinking, please don't hate this, please don't hate this, please don't hate this. And I would never let him quit. I'd always make him follow through on these things, and it would be torture. And I just like, I don't want to hear complaining all week, please don't hate this. And I walked in there and he runs up to me and he gets really close and he says really quietly, "It was so fun, Mommy. I loved it so much." And I just thought, phew, okay, well, that's great. And so then he went and he finished out the week and he put on the play and he was so nervous. He thought he was going to forget his lines. And we kept telling him, it's just going to be the parents. Nobody's going to care. Don't worry about it. We like helped him learn all of his lines. And he was the one kid there that did not have to have lines whispered to him, you know, because of his age. Like, he knew all of his lines and he played that role with so much gusto that people that were not his family walked up to him afterwards to tell him he did a great job. You know, I mean, he just so loved it. And so then we went and had, you know, we went to Waterloo afterwards and had some chicken wings and we were debriefing about the week. You know, we said, we're going to happy hour. And I asked him, I said, so what was your favorite part of the week? And he said, putting on the play. It was the best week of my life. I'm going to miss my friends so much. And he started crying. And I just thought, oh my gosh. And I'm like, I wish you told me. I would have gotten phone numbers. I would have, you know, and but
well, this is a sign of a young man who has found something that is a passion.
Well, for the time being, right? And so then a month later, he said he wanted to be in movies, and he kind of kept pushing it. And so I found a website that no longer exists, but it had casting calls, and I submitted him for an open call for an extra on an independent film, and they picked him and they asked me to be in it too. And he just had the best time being an extra, which anyone who's ever done it knows it's boring and you sit around and you wait. But I also met a lot of other parents because it was a couple of kids' birthday party scenes. He worked a couple of days. And they told me about the UT student film scene. They told me about other websites. And so he started doing student films, and within less than a year, he had an agent. And in less than a year after that, he booked his first commercial, and he started booking leads in the UT student films in pretty short order.
Nice.
So
nice.
Yeah. So that's how that happened.
Got it.
And I mean, if he had been in school, there's no way we would have been able to do it. A lot of people assumed that we started him homeschooling for his acting, but no, the homeschooling was before. It was like he was allowed the time to figure out what he loved because he wasn't in school. And we actually had the time to commit to that, and the auditions and everything that entailed, training.
So you have so much to tell us. I'm looking at the time and I want to get to
I'm sorry.
Right.
I'm
No,
sorry.
no, you're absolutely fabulous. But I want to go back to how at 8th grade. I love the fact that, oh, he saw it in a film. It looked like fun. What's reality like in 8th grade?
Well, he had to start getting up really early in the morning again, right? And catch that bus, because I told him, I'm not driving you. This is your thing. If you want to do this, this is your thing. And so he caught the bus and he went to class, and he, you know, the mood issues started again because of the poor sleep. And he just, how do I say this? Because I don't want to make it sound like he's a quitter, right? But he got to this point where he was like, none of this makes sense. He was already done with Algebra 2 Trig. He had to take math. The highest math they offered was geometry. For him to even take that, because he had done an online math program that was non-accredited, he had to go sit for a placement test at UT that I had to pay for, where he got credit by exam for algebra. And so he took geometry. He was taking geometry again, and that was online through the school, and it was wasn't really even a real interface. And so he finally, after about 3.5 weeks, and he got failed on an assignment, and this was crazy. It was because he missed the first few days of class because we were out in LA for something. And it wasn't anywhere in sorry, I'm having a mind blank, but what do they call it? Not agenda, but when they,
curriculum?
Not the curriculum, but you know what they give you at the beginning of any class that's got your schedule on it?
Yes.
I'm sorry, my mind.
Syllabus.
Thank you. It was nowhere in the syllabus, but they told the students on the first day of the class, you have to number your pages in your notebook. And so he didn't number his pages in the notebook. So he gets his history notebook from the first check back, and they failed him for not numbering the pages. And then the other thing was he wanted to take drama, but they wouldn't let him in advanced drama because he wasn't there the previous spring to audition for it, because he was in Canada making a movie as a lead, but they couldn't waive it. So he was in intermediate drama. And so at some point he finally just said, this doesn't make any sense. And he withdrew. And so then he was a full-time homeschooler again. And
how long was it, like 2 weeks, 2 months? How long?
No, it was like 3.5 weeks.
No, good for him. You call it a quitter. I say good for you. For me.
Well, I don't think it was quitting. I was relieved when he said he didn't want to do it anymore. I was so grateful. But still, a lot of people, they think, oh, well, you're letting them quit. And I even had people say that you should make them finish the semester. And I'm like, why? Like, he's being sleep deprived. He's getting cranky again. He's starting to become anxious. He's getting nothing out of this. Why? Why would we do that? But
well, I always describe schooling as fraudulent and abusive. Fraudulent because if you're reading, talking about ideas, maybe doing a little bit of math, school is entirely unnecessary, as I think your experience largely shows. And the abusive, kids have all sorts of mental health issues because of various forms of shame, blame, stupidity, so.
Right. Well, one of the things I want to say is that this traditional school, and I say traditional because it's only been around a couple hundred years, right? It works for some kids. I mean, I don't know that it works for most of them. And some kids do very, very well in it. And I'm telling you, those are the ones who become teachers. And they don't understand that just because it worked for them, it doesn't work for a lot of other people.
Yeah. They become teachers and education policy experts, where they say, we have to force this on everybody. But I won't get started. So
okay, well, I'll just say I have my very best friend is an education policy. And she will probably watch this. So it's not everybody. It's not everybody.
Well, hopefully she's asking for more freedom for students.
Well, she's a professor. So, but anyway.
Yeah. So after 8th grade, similar kind of balance? Was it mostly unschooly with some math, or what was after 8th grade style?
Well, during 8th grade, it was very much, I tried to get a science curriculum, and he fought us on that. So I was very much like, here's your math. He was doing alex.com at this point. I hobbled together a curriculum. I got him, I think it was Institute in Excellence for writing, the CD set. I mean, and that's the whole thing. Like, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm not a teacher, I can homeschool. Can I just tell you, I am like the laziest homeschooling parent there is. I find stuff, I'm like, here, you do this, I'll check in on you. If you have any questions, I'll be over here on Facebook. Come ask me questions. And that's all I did. That's what I did in 3rd grade. I mean, other than the history where we would talk about it together. But in 8th grade, we did some more Socratic stuff. I found, but I never bought like a curriculum in a box. Like a lot of people, they say, oh, which curriculum are you using? We never did that. I just kind of picked and choose. And I really liked Alex for math. And so he, at that point, I made him, oh, okay, so he hadn't finished Algebra 2 Trig. He was halfway through it when he started. I made him finish Algebra 2 Trig on Alex. So he had to do that before the end of the year. I made him do the IEW writing. I gave up on the science. I figured he'd deal with that in high school. I had him, I directed some reading for him, like historical fiction. We discussed that. And otherwise, it was back to him just doing activities, doing his own thing. But I did say we're going to have to figure out something for you for high school because this is a little too loosey-goosey. And so I bribed him. And I had read about a pilot program that the community college was doing. I told him he had a couple choices. I said either he could, you know, apply to the magnet program in the public school, which I didn't think was a good fit because it started too early. He could look at some of the private schools. At that point, he had some acting money in his savings account. So that was his option. He could use the money to help pay for that, supplement that. Or, you know, I found this pilot program at Austin Community College. It was called Early College High School for Independent Learners. He'd be, you know, branded as a homeschooler, but he would take dual credit classes there. And I remembered that I really started liking school when I went to community college. And so I thought, well, maybe that would be a good fit for him. And and the reason I mean, I was a horrible student growing up. I failed biology in high school. I failed Spanish. I almost failed Latin. I was not a good student when I was younger, but I went to community college out of high school. And for the first time, I really loved school. And I think the reason was, the way high school and elementary school is taught, it's like you have so many subjects at once. You take all the subjects all year long and you barely touch on anything. And if you're kind of thinker like I am, and then my son is the same way, you really like to go in depth into things, right? And so I thought, well, if he's taking fewer classes where he gets to go in depth, and at the community college, they expect a degree of critical thinking. And that's exciting, then you're really using your brain. So I told him, I said, look, if you do this program and you graduate with a 3.75 or higher, I'll take you to LA. You'll be a professional actor out there. And my hope was that he would at least just have an AA by the time he graduated. And that way, if he went to LA and he decided he didn't want to be an actor, he wouldn't end up down in front of the Dolby Theater, shaking down tourists for $5 dressed as Elmo to have a picture taken, right? Like, he would have something. So he could be like 21 and 22 and say, I can transfer into a 4-year school. I might want to do this better. So he'd have that option. So that was pretty much the carrot that I used to get him to do the program. And it turned out he ended up loving school once he was in the community college environment, just like I kind of hoped he would. And so then he decided as a junior that he wanted to go to a 4-year school.
My brother was getting D's and F's in high school, and then he went to one of these early community colleges, and instantly, because they had allowed dual enrollment kind of thing. And I think the autonomy and agency, I think a certain kind of teen needs to be treated more like an adult.
Right, right.
I know there's the Harvard punchline at the end, but I do want to touch on the Pierce Brosnan AMC The Sun Show, because that's I think his celebrity credential. So just give a little bit on that.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. His biggest role was in this like cheesy kids movie that he filmed in Canada where he's one of the leads, and that's on Amazon Prime right now. That's called Monkey Up. It's really cheesy, but if you got a kid that's like 6 to 11, they're probably going to enjoy it. But his biggest projects, in terms of things that were most visible, and and he made the most money working on The Sun, and it was on for 2 seasons on AMC, and he was a supporting character, but he did play Pierce Brosnan's grandson in it, and it was a great experience because it did give him an opportunity. Like, he was going to table reads weekly, he was going to set weekly, he had a set tutor. So it really was much more like he'd done a couple episodes of Better Call Saul, which is like a great show, but he only had a few lines, and you know, and that was a great experience too. But this, because he was working so frequently, he worked on 14 episodes over the 2 seasons. You know, it gave him a real taste of the industry. It may very well be the reason he decided he wanted out of the industry, but it gave him a good taste of it, right? And, you know, now he's got a college fund, so that's kind of sweet.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, not every kid who doesn't go to school until college decides to apply to Harvard. Tell us a little bit about how you decided, or he decided, on colleges to apply to.
Okay, well, he got into the whole, you know, he started going to the road shows and stuff where they'd come to town and they'd talk about the colleges. And I'll tell you right now, I did not encourage him to apply to Harvard. I thought good luck. Just like when he said he wanted to be an actor, I'm like, yeah, good luck. I thought the same thing about Harvard. I mean, he got a really high score the time he took the SAT, and his grades are really high. And of course, I think he is a wonderful special child, but I'm also his mother, right? And so, you know, the fact that he's a middle class boy, you know, white boy, who's not first generational college, you know, and yeah, he's an actor, that kind of makes him interesting, but it wasn't like he's one of the kids from Stranger Things, right? You know, so I'm just thinking that's not enough of a hook to get him in. So he's kind of looking at Stanford. He's interested in Stanford. So we go to this road show where the people from Stanford are presenting, but the people from Harvard were also presenting. And the guy from Harvard gets in front of the room and he says, I'm here to tell every single person in this room, you can afford to go to Harvard. And I'm thinking, yeah. And he goes, we have the most generous financial aid of any school. And so I'm telling you, we have a financial aid process where nobody has to take loans out. And so that sounded better to me, right? You know, but then he shows the first slide, and it's of Annenberg Hall, and that is the freshman dining hall. And Caleb gasped, and he said, it looks like Hogwarts. You know? And so, you know, he's a big Harry Potter fan. And so he suddenly was like interested in Harvard because of a dining room. And so when we went, every summer we go up on this camping trip in the Northeast. So when we went up there, we went on a tour, and also the other thing, at that point, Princeton was his first choice for a ridiculous reason. And it was because his character in the show, The Sun, was headed to Princeton. So he'd heard so much about Princeton. He'd been talking Princeton. So he thought it would be hilarious if he actually went to Princeton in real life. So we also visited Princeton. And after visiting both schools, he decided he did not want to apply to Princeton, and Harvard suddenly became his top choice. And partially it was just, you know, the girl that gave us a tour was first generation college. She was really down to earth. We were just chit-chatting with her, and he kind of told her about his background, and she said, look, I'm not in admissions, but you kind of seem exactly like the kind of kid that they want to let in here. And I thought, oh, well, you know, maybe he does have a chance. And so, so a lot of people say, oh, Harvard, they don't like homeschoolers. And it's because of that stupid essay that a woman at the law school wrote. But she's in law school. The law school is not the college. It's part of the university, but it's not the college. And they do let homeschoolers in, and they let him in. So I don't think that the school overall is as anti-homeschool as everybody seems to think it is.
No.
Well, fair enough. She's an exception. So before going to the Cath question
Right.
and the question, I think you mentioned first generation college. You know, just say a little bit more about that.
Oh, first generation? Well, so my husband and I are both first generational college students. Like, we both came from working class families, right? And so there's just a little something different about us. You know, we're not as polished. And I think that, you know, because the girl who gave us the tour, you know, she was very down to earth, right? And, you know, she wasn't, I mean, there's a book called Excellent Sheep, right? A lot of kids are really groomed on this path.
Yes.
And so I think it was nice for him to meet somebody who clearly had not been on that same path. and he really connected with her. And the people that spoke and the presentation that they gave, it just made us feel very comfortable. Like I had some preconceived notions about the school that I had been wrong about. My notions about Princeton that were preconceived, not wrong about them.
I super love the fact that, you know, Harry Potter is responsible for Caleb considering Harvard, and, you know, go J.K. Rowling.
Yeah.
Cass, do you want to give her the Cass question?
Sure. So I'm always curious to, you know, when I'm talking to homeschoolers about, you know, what do they think that is actually missing out in the real world that would really benefit them if they're not in the school system? What do you wish had been out there for you, or were you missing anything in particular that you could share with us?
Well, I think, you know, there were resources out there that I was not good about accessing in the beginning, that first year and a half. Like if I had done better accessing the resources that there were, working a little bit harder to find him more kids to socialize with, I think that we would have kept homeschooling. And in fact, he started a social committee group his junior year in high school, bringing together kids from all the small micro schools in the area and homeschoolers. And he would plan these outings because he decided that there just wasn't enough, you know, because he'd been in the micro schools, right? And if you've only got 5 or 6 or 7 kids your age at these schools and you don't click with any of them, then you're kind of out of luck. And so his feeling was, well, if he reached out to all these different schools and planned these outings, like, you know, paddle boarding or going to Barton Springs or going to bowling, you know, they do stuff like this. And he made a lot of friends that way. So probably resources would be like maybe a little bit of more organized social outings.
That makes a lot of sense. I often think of the schools as sort of, they've captured all the cool social activities in this big day prison. And so people outside the day prison don't have access to the cool social activities.
Right.
So Barnes, you want to give her the math question?
Sure. I like the day prison comment there, Michael. That's good stuff. Yeah. So Jennifer, so my question to you is, you know, you had some exposure to the educational system for yourself as well as your kids. What is one thing that you would change if you could raise, you know, pulling from Harry Potter again, if you could use the magic wand, what's one thing that you could do or would do to change how the system works? What would you say?
Well, this is kind of a trick answer. A complete paradigm shift. Because right now we are still stuck in this one size fits all way of thinking about kids. And as I said, it works well for some kids, it works for other kids, but it is hurting so many other kids. And not everybody has like I mean, I don't want to be all self-congratulatory or whatever, but it took a lot of courage to do what we did. I mean, I had his 2nd grade teacher tell me off on his last day, telling me that she felt like I was irreparably harming him. I was doing the wrong thing. I just had to say to her, I appreciate your input, but I know my son and I know this is the right thing for him, you know. And it was hard. It was really hard. And like, you know, second guessing myself, I would have loved to be able to keep him in a school setting where I didn't have to pay anything. Yeah. But our needs just weren't being met. His needs were not being met. And so if the school system could let go of this one size fits all, like if we allowed different schools to try different approaches and each family could pick what approach is going to work best. Like you could have mixed age classrooms. So you know, like my son, for instance, who in 4th grade, when he went to that micro school and they did a poetry unit, his writing took off. I mean, he published more poems in that poetry anthology, and he's a very strong writer today. And I honestly believe if he had been forced to write in 3rd grade, if we had kept him into school, I don't think he'd be a strong writer. I think he would have developed a horrible anxiety around it. But yet he was ready to do 4th grade math in 1st grade. he was ready to read at a higher level. So if we had mixed age classrooms where there's no shame in being a later reader or a later writer or a later mathematician, where we could like serve all kids, like some kids need more hands-on, other kids are perfectly fine being lectured to, some need more Socratic dialogue. If we had like these different options that were, and parents got to choose that, I think it would be great. And I would have not felt the need to take him out of school.
Yeah. Thank you. No, that's very well said. And as a parent who has followed a similar path as you, I can fully agree with that too. But I don't think that paradigm shift is going to happen anytime soon, unfortunately.
I know. And I mean, the thing is, you know, I didn't feel like I could keep being that parent that kept arguing and kept like showing up and kept being that parent.
It's a battle.
And that's why we had to do it.
Yeah, it's a battle. Yeah.
Well, just what flashed up for me is, you know, on all the high schools, they have the list in bronze of the, you know, champion swimmers and champion track athletes and all of this. I think we need kind of these bronze plaques with champion parents who stood up to the monster. Yeah. So I hereby award you, Jennifer Capoccia, champion parent for standing up to the monster. Thank you so much.
My first trophy ever.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for what you do for the homeschooling community and the alt school community. And thank you for mothering Caleb.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I hope I didn't rattle on too much. I was
great. Great conversation.
A little nervous.
It was great. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.